It began with my fellow writers and teachers, Nicole Walker, Robin Hemley, Nicole's husband, Eric Sather, who's a cinematographer, and I went to the Phoenix Nonfiction Now Writers Conference in 2018. And at that, so actually the film began. The film is the first project, then the book came out of that, and then a second book came out of that. So anyway.
And what is the film called?
The film's called How We Got Here. Melville Plus Nietzsche Divided by the Square Root of Allan Bloom times Zizek squared equals Bannon, which, is meant to be a impossibly tongue-twisting and provocative and sort of ludicrously pretentious title. But I actually think that's what the movie's about, and I think it's what the follow-up book is about. Anyway, at this conference in 2018, November 1st through 3rd in Phoenix, Robin, Eric, Nicole, and I asked our fellow writing teachers and writers, journalists, professors, lyric essayists, a series of challenging questions like, is there such thing as truth? Is there such thing as nonfiction? What's the difference between truth and belief? Is there such thing as absolute truth? Are you superstitious? Do you believe in ghosts? Have your siblings taught you that your view of the world is wrong? And most provocatively, we hoped, and most troublingly, why are you here and not canvassing for Stacey Abrams? This was, a couple days before the November 2018 midterm elections. And so we culled and curated a series of answers, and Eric filmed these in Phoenix. This was all the way back in 2018. Then onto that, I and my film editor, James Nugent, who also edited some previous films I've done, including Lynch: A History, which is indeed very collage-like, that we felt like that was only part of the question, so that we filmed a bunch of other people, many writers that you and your audience probably know, people like Joe Wenderoth and Edie Madev and Charles Mudede and Paisley Rekdal and Elena Passarella, that we asked them to film two truths and a lie. And sort of maddeningly, you can't tell, of course, indeed, which are two truths and a lie. And then we added what we like to call the Melville to Bannon section, in which we show how the death of God led to the death of truth, led to the right wing first demonizing deconstruction, and then rather brilliantly and mischievously weaponizing deconstruction. And then the idea is, now here we are, where we're in the month before the election, and virtually hourly in the election, the weaponization of truth and falsehood is really what the election is totally about. The film and book could not speak more precisely to where we are. I mean, I don't sort of mean that as like yay for me or yay for the book and film, but like that is, how we got here is meant to be, like I'm totally baffled by cultural and political discourse on an hourly level, and the film and book were an attempt to figure it out. How to square the idea of poetic truth or ecstatic truth, Werner Herzog's idea that documentary film is a form of ecstatic truth. How to affirm that, which I very much want to in my books and films, and the books and films I really love. How to square that with a carnivalesque political theater. What happens when all the ideas that you and our fellow writers and teachers talk about, that truth is ephemeral, that knowledge is hard to maintain, that there is no capital T truth, there is no absolute God, it's all a bit of a fiction? What happens when that changes venues and we enter the political realm? It's all very cool when Wittgenstein is saying it. What happens when Steve Miller's saying it. And that
Steve
honestly,
Miller or Steve Bannon?
well,
Or
both,
Stephen Miller? You mean Stephen Miller,
yeah. I was sort of throwing him out because he's a Santa Monica based guy. So.
my mind immediately flashed to the musician, so forgive me. But it's Stephen Miller is the Trump, the kind of Trump insider who's very anti-immigration and kind of a ludicrous villain character.
Right. So anyway, I was probably too much information on that book, but anyway, it began as a film. Some fellow writers and I trying to explore how a lot of the truths that serious writers of the essay explore, and some of which that you've explored in your own books, like Bored, for instance, is totally in the realm. And then, what happens when that jumps the tracks and gets rather brilliantly weaponized as political strategy. It's not some cool, poetic, interesting sort of philosophical investigation. It's meant as political chicanery. And obviously it happens on the right and the left, but it happens most overtly, I think, and most consciously on the authoritarian right. And then strangely,
the most cynically, I would add.
Exactly.
You can trace it back. I don't know how far you can trace it back to its point of origin, but I distinctly remember, and I think have quoted before, even on this show at some point, Karl Rove talking about how we're going to create our own reality.
Of course.
It almost seemed like he said that with an air of epiphany. It felt like a kind of pivot, and I think
it's a crucial moment. It was quoted in a New York Times Magazine profile in 2004 before the Kerry Bush election. If that was 2004, 2008, I'm forgetting right now, but I think it was 2004, I think. And it was a New York Times Magazine profile, and Rove wasn't quoted per se, but it was clearly Rove who was the unacknowledged source. And I've quoted that a lot in books and films. It is a crucial moment. I think a crucial figure in it is Vladislav Surkov, Russian sort of brain trust. And he's a former professional clown and performance artist. And Surkov read in the mid to late 80s a lot of deconstruction. I think he's a crucial figure who read a lot of Western structuralism, post-structuralism, deconstruction, everyone from Heidegger to, say, Derrida and beyond. And from these people, he developed this idea of nonlinear warfare. Basically, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit. He completely understood as a performance artist and a clown how you could take all of the rhetoric and grammar of the last 100 years of political thought and frankly weaponize it as nonlinear warfare political theater. And I think he's a crucial figure as the authoritarian right across the globe, from, of course, Putin to Xi to Bolsonaro to, of course, Trump, are using, to me, very heavily exactly this. It's almost like they all had some big meeting. Instead of it being a 1920s Paris salon in which we talk about modernism or, the New York school of, the Ashcan school of painting or something. I mean, it's as if these 12 guys all got in a room and says, here's the fucking playbook. This is it. Because they all follow the exact same thing. And, Trump had or has certain, or did have certain chops as a sort of insult comedian. And he performs it very overtly. Like, to take a super obvious example, that when he says, I hate Taylor Swift, you could say he's just acting like a petulant 5-year-old child, but there is political theater behind that, I think.
No doubt. And the other project that you have in the works is another great title. It's called The Christian Existentialist and a Psychoanalytic Atheist Walk Into a Trump Rally.
Yeah.
And the book is a work of literary collage, which is what you do. And it is a dialogue between yourself and a colleague / friend, just kind of trying to make sense of Trump. And this is not the first time you've taken a swing at this in a work of literature. You have another book that you did on Trump. And I connect with that. I think a lot of us do. I think that this era that we have been living through for the past decade, with Trump kind of at the reins of the Republican Party, has been uniquely exhausting, and I think that's by design. It's exhausting to consider him day in and day out. And it's also baffling, the fact that this guy has such traction with so many millions of people. That's terrifying to me, because he seems like such a transparent fraud to me, and such a goon, and such a bully, and such a grim figure. It's impossible for me to even conceive of entrusting him with power. And yet here we are, a month out from the 2024 election, and it's a coin flip.
Yeah.
So I think that trying to make sense of him in a work of literature is not only an obvious, but a necessary move. I think people who write books need to be trying to make sense of this, because to make sense of him, as you said earlier, in sync with the news cycle, trying to dissect it hour by hour, impossible.
Yeah. No, you summarized it so well. I think, there's a few positions one could take. One could just say, I'm going to just hide out in Middletown, Connecticut, and write my lyric poems, or whatever you're doing at Wesleyan University or whatever. And then, or you could say, well, I'm going to canvas and I'm going to work on this stuff. Or you're going to, I guess people on the far right or whatever, people who watch, everybody's distant uncle who's watching, Newsmax or Fox or Onan or whatever it's called. And that, I was thinking, like, when Trump was, it's kind of a corny idea, but that the rise of Trump in 2016, I tend not to idealize David Foster Wallace per se. I basically like Wallace's essays, and I don't connect with his fiction as much at all. But I kind of thought, I forgot when he committed suicide, but I did sort of think in a sort of sentimental way, like, what would Wallace do? In the sense that I do love his essay on John McCain quite a lot, in which he tries to understand McCain. It's a beautiful essay. And I think, early as Trump was coming down the the gold-plated staircase, and I did think kind of sentimentally of having, like a conscience, what are we here for? And that I did write my first book about Trump. I think it came out in 2018, called Nobody Hates Trump More Than Trump, and Intervention. And this famous line of G.K. Chesterton, the 20th century British critic and essayist, he was asked, what's wrong with the world? And he answered, I am. And that basically I'm terribly interested in, not in any way ameliorating my fear of Trump or anyone else's fear of Trump or distrust, but, trying to understand it. And so anyway, that book came out in 2018. In a strange way, that was a preliminary to How We Got Here. And then How We Got Here, the film, became the book, which in a way burrows down even more, you could say, sort of pedantically into, basically tries to take us, believe it or not, from sort of Socrates all the way up to very contemporary political philosophy, and tries to show how in a way, the price of radical skepticism, the Western map of radical skepticism to which we are all subscribers, the end point of that radical skepticism is this moment that we're in which the most simple fact or truth is up for grabs. I'm trying to think of a current moment. And then there's a friend of mine, Scott Kent Jones, who's, a Christian existentialist. He's, all but dissertation from divinity school at Princeton. And he thinks of himself as Christian, but he's also like deeply immersed in existentialism and doubt. Anyway, I've been on his podcast a few times, called Give and Take, and I developed a nice intellectual friendship with him, and we tried to talk about it. And I think we both have largely the same take, where neither of us are, fans of Donald Trump, and we both hope Kamala Harris wins. And if I had to bet, I guess I would bet that she wins, I think, just barely. But in any case, Scott and I try and wrestle with the mystery of it. And like, for instance, when you said a few minutes ago, Brad, like, well, he's exhausting. How could this fraud, you know, that's all very intentional on Trump's part. It's crucial that we hate him. It's crucial that we push back against him. I don't know. I was just watching, like, I was in the hotel the other night here in New Jersey, and I was just watching Colbert do a riff about Trump. And I was just so repelled by he was playing exactly into Trump's, I guess Trump made fun of Colbert or something, or you have to understand how much liberal or quasi-liberal centrist media criticism of Trump is utterly a part of Trump's playbook. To have Joe Biden say, "Oh, I was so disgusted by this anti-Semitic trope," that does absolutely nothing. Like, you have to understand I'm trying to conduct, you might call it, a sort of metacognitive discourse about what's really going on. And again, I don't understand it, but I felt and feel compelled to try to figure it out because, this is the stuff I've been working with ever since I became a nonfiction writer, beginning with a book like Remote in 96, through Reality Hunger in 2010, through a book like War is Beautiful in 2015, and then all the way through now. I've exploited, in a good way, I hope, artistically, these questions. What's truth? What's knowledge? What's memory? How well can we know ourselves? How well can we know someone else? If we can't know someone else, then what's the value of language, et cetera, et cetera? And these are the very questions which Trump et al. Are brilliantly manipulating. So I guess in a way I'm asking myself, to what degree have I and some of my fellow travelers, including people at this Phoenix conference, to what degree are we, in our very small, incredibly small way, complicit or part of the problem?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, their book brings up so many questions. The film brings up so many interesting questions. I think I struggle personally with how to respond. And
you mean in general, or to these books, or both?
I mean in general, but to the
Right.
books too. I mean,
Right.
it's kind of like this quandary that I think a lot of us find ourselves in. And I think of social media in particular, because that's where so much of the news cycle unfolds in a kind of play-by-play fashion.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, and I don't, I can't speak for anybody listening, but I'm imagining I'm not alone in having this experience of struggling with how to respond or whether to respond.
Exactly.
And like, do I say something here? Like, because if I say something, am I just adding to the noise?
Yeah.
And then if I say something about this, then shouldn't I also say something about that? And does it even matter? And will I just be annoying the people who are, following me, most of whom probably agree with me anyway?
Exactly.
And it's like, do I respond with outrage? Or does that actually feed into the pattern that Trump wants, which gives him which empowers him or gives him this sense or this aura of power that he doesn't deserve? Or should I be mocking him only, which is the way you're supposed to treat an aspiring autocrat and a bully? It's like I have an embarrassing number of times in recent weeks written a tweet and then deleted it.
Wow.
Composed it and then not sent it because I'm like, nah. It's almost like there's like some old story about Abraham Lincoln, how when he would get angry, he would write a letter that he would then not send on purpose.
That's fascinating.
It's kind of that feeling.
I know. I think, I mean, people ask me, like, how could you deal with that material? Isn't it so depressing to have written this book on Trump in 2018, I think it was, and then I did How We Got Here, and then I did How We Got Here, the book, and now I've done the Christian Existentialist and the Psychoanalytic Atheist Walk Into a Trump Rally, and then, but it's like, I don't know, it reminds me a little of this book I did several years ago, which I alluded to, called War is Beautiful, the New York Times Pictorial Guide to the Glamour of Armed Conflict, which is a book I'm really proud of. I don't know if you ever saw that one, Brad.
No, I didn't.
It's kind of a cool book where it's 64 photographs, all color pics, front page of the New York Times, impossibly pornographic, glamorizing images of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, in which the Times, ostensibly a centrist paper or slightly center left, so-called arbiter of the culture, history's first draft, et cetera, these pictures were just impossibly glamorizing of war. And it bothered me for about 30 years, going all the way back to the first Gulf War in 91. And then I guess continuing, say 20 years or 25 years, coming up all the way to 2005, when people still got hard copy of the New York Times. I'd get this blue bag on my front porch on the West Coast, and I would be like, how can this be a photograph of war? It looks like a Warhol painting, or a Rothko painting, a Gerhard Richter painting, they all look like modern painting masterpieces. Like all the art department at the Times had all gone to school in visual art, and they were all printing as war photographs these impossibly beautiful abstract expressionist paintings. And it just bothered me for about 25 years. And I said, I said, I'm, going to ruin I don't know if the Times still has much suasion over people's literary reputations. I'm hoping not at all. But I thought, I'm going to ruin my career here. But that's what a writer should do. Like, I felt really strongly, not in any easy moral sense, but a bunch of researchers and I pulled every single front page of the Times for 25 years. And I was hoping to find evidence to prove myself wrong, so I didn't have to do the book and torpedo my career. But I thought it was just crucial to do. It became a very provocative book. Came out with a photo press called Powerhouse in 2015. Times sued the publisher. Publisher sued me, sort of, and got very complicated. All the attention drove more attention in the book. Anyway, it's a good example of how Collage, the book is nothing but 64 photographs with quotes I've pulled from various philosophers, showing how the Times is showing that war isn't hell, that war is a kind of beautiful, distant heck. It's just out there. Don't pay any attention to it. Open the paper and buy the stuff that we're advertising and read the Thomas Friedman column, but don't let the war distract you. Anyway, I'm just very proud of that book because I thought, it's not a book I, quote, should do, but because it bugged me, just like Trump bugs me. And I guess that's the thing. And maybe that gets us to Collage. I still do feel deeply contradictory feelings toward Trump, not politically, but sometimes, at least at first, I felt immense admiration for his immense performance art. Like I think he's lost a lot of, but I would sometimes be impressed by his command of the stage, his command of rhetoric. I mean, he's especially compared to Hillary, say, he understood stagecraft. I mean, a classic example, of course, is how he handled the assassination attempt, for instance, using the highly Christian word pierced to describe his, a bullet grazing the edge of his ear, pierced, to his pseudo-Christian followers would carry immense crucifixion weight. There's no way Trump thought of pierce, but someone in Trump's orbit thought of pierce to describe the bullet. Anyway, just like I'm utterly fascinated by the idea of this plutocrat appealing to an out-of-work West Virginia coal miner, that's bizarre. How does that happen? And you could just say, but I want to understand that. And I also sort of wanted to understand, why did I have such weird relationship to the Times' pornographically beautiful war photos? Because I found them so beautiful, and I hated that I found them so beautiful. So I had to do a book to try to understand and explain it.
Well, you're writing books, and I want to get into how you do it, because I think there are a lot of people who are fans of yours or fans of this kind of work who wonder about the best practices. And it's a bit of a leading edge question, because I think that the work that you're doing, doesn't have a ton of precedent in literature. You're kind of pulling from other media oftentimes in terms of inspiration.
Yeah.
But I want to get into process, just how you approach it, because I think, everybody, when it comes to writing books, sort of has their own bespoke process, but there are things we can learn from others that we can add to our own little, quiver of arrows.
Yeah.
And I read something you said about how projects tend to begin for you. And you sort of alluded to this already in the conversation. I think you said something had been bothering you for 25 years, and I started laughing. But you say, quote, "I stumble into a metaphor that in my grandiosity, I think explains the universe, at least for me, at least for the moment." So something you will read, see, hear, you'll have some kind of reaction to it that you've learned to recognize. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Thanks for flagging that, Brad. That really is the origin. Like there's that I'm not a huge Nabokov fan anymore, but there was an early thing of his, he said, where he goes, the value of the book can be measured precisely with the original sort of epiphanic revelation. That's the key moment. That's the sort of Big Bang. Like that's the moment that the book starts. Again, I'm not comparing myself to the Big Bang or to Nabokov, but that epiphany is everything. Like, what is the matter with me that I can't wait for the New York Times to show up on my doorstep at 3 a.m. and I can't wait to look at the pornographically beautiful war photo pics? Like, this is fucked up. I gotta unpack this. Like, that's the moment. Because it wasn't like, oh, I hate the Times war photos or I really love them. It's like something's going on and I have to understand it. And so I have learned to, my goodness, I'm 68 now. I've written, over 20 books. And at this point, the process is faster than it had been earlier. And so I'm trying to think of the first example. And it tends to be this mixture of love and hate, like a book like Remote. I hate American mass media, but boy, did or do I consume it. I just, I follow it ravenously, but I have total kind of Frankfurt School contempt for all of it. But I'm like an American kid who was born in LA and grew up in California, and like, I sort of love this stuff. Or Black Planet, my book about being a white fan of the NBA and the weird ways in which the NBA is a funhouse mirror that reflects back the insanity of American racial history for 400 years. Or those two books come to mind as beginning with Mass Culture or American Racial Politics. Certainly Reality Hunger, in 2010. Or I'm trying to think of other books that fit that. Certainly War is Beautiful, certainly Trump. I forget if we talked about this on your podcast earlier, Brad, this book I did in 2019 called The Trouble with Men, Reflections on Sex, Love, Marriage, Porn, and Power, which is sort of a kind of dicey meditation on my own psychosexuality and on obliquely on my marriage. And I was really confused about it, about my own who was I as a sexual being? Where did I fall on the sort of the BDSM? Like, I don't know. I still don't know. I'm not like some dungeon inhabitant, nor am I. Nor am I vanilla. I'm just kind of a person. I don't know. But I needed to explore it. I was deeply confused about my marriage and my sexuality, not in any grand way, but something was there, and I just needed to explore the contradictions. The key for me is that they aren't my boring little contradictions like, do I prefer vanilla or chocolate ice cream? Or even do I prefer Trump or Kamala Harris? It's like, there's something in me I want to explore. And it's important to me that it have cultural resonance, like mass culture, American racial discourse. What's the nature of nonfiction or reality? I was terribly frustrated around the discourse around what's nonfiction, like James Fry and J.T. Leroy and that whole thing. I just knew the discourse was deeply wrong to me. And yet I'm the child of two journalists. And so I was confused about how I thought about it. So for me, it's a personal issue, which I can feel on my nerve endings, like sex or death or war, big stuff that isn't just like, oh, gee, I'm against capital punishment. It's like, I feel my confusion about my sexuality. I can feel it on my nerve endings. And then it's crucial for me that it have some cultural traction. Like, it's something I hope other people are interested in. And then thirdly, this probably sounds a bit grandiose, but that you hope it has some ton of timeless anthropological value. Like, it's not just, oh, gee, is Trump good or bad, but what is our relationship to the nature of performative authoritarianism? I mean, that goes back to the beginning of civilization. So it's me, the culture, and just broad human nature. Like, but it begins with contradiction, doubt, sometimes shame and guilt, and also passion. Like, this is attacking me, and I sort of need to explore it. That's basically the beginning of the book for me.
And I think most people who write, just most human beings, if they can quiet down a little bit, can recognize the things that are bothering them the most, and can start to understand what their best subjects might be. And then from a pure process standpoint, after you have landed on a topic like war, sex, death, whatever it might be, like you then say, like, I shoot a lot of film, like in quotes, that's kind of the first step to building a work of nonfiction literary collage, is to amass text.
Indeed.
You're kind of indiscriminate about it. You're pretty free in your process, right?
Exactly. No, exactly. I mean, you're taking me through the process very nicely, where exactly it begins with this sort of big bang of contradiction, doubt, passion, confusion, urgency, etc. Then, yeah, again, maybe because I'm just not very narratively gifted, sometimes I'll be watching a movie. I mean, even have written about this. Like, I don't really care about plot. Something is the matter with my DNA or something. Like, I just don't care. Like, sometimes I have trouble following the plot, or I just don't really care. It all seems so trivial to me. Like, there's a famous essay by Edmund Wilson called something like, who killed Roger Ackroyd? His point was, no one cares who killed Roger Ackroyd, which is, I guess, from an Agatha Christie novel. But in any case, I mean, in my 20s and early 30s, I wrote 3 novels, which, were okay. And they got increasingly experimental, but I just don't think I have a gift for either developing plot, creating plot. And also, I don't get how most plots embody the human condition. They often seem, as John D'Agata would say, a form of entertainment. They're there to keep the reader turning pages. Of course, sometimes that's not the case, and the novel achieves a great allegorical value, but most narratives just don't. I feel like I'm wasting my time. It's just deep in my DNA. I realize it's a minority position, but it's just the way I experience the world. So what I do instead, like someone else might say, okay, I'm obsessed with my, who I am psychosexually, and they would create a fiction about it, a la, whatever, Lolita or something. But I find myself bored by that tracking device. I just find myself it all feels very much like going through the paces, going through the motion. So instead, as you say, Brad, I gather a bunch of material, stuff I wrote before, stuff I've read, do interviews, reportage, talk to friends, email friends, surf the web, look at film, look at video, look at TV.
And you're putting all of this stuff, like just from a purely technical standpoint. Do you have like a file, multiple files?
Yeah.
Do you use Google Docs? Like, how do you do it? Like in practice?
I know what you mean. I think the best example for me, again, it's kind of a book that's a little dated now, but like Trouble with Men came out in 2019, so it's not that long ago. But that book was literally 3,000 pages of about 15 notebooks, and I sort of carry them around with me, in which it was just, it was just one big Word document in which I would just pour stuff in. A lot of it was incredibly repetitious. Some of it stuff that could never see the light of day. Like stuff I would, look at a porn site or whatever and pull images or people's commentary. Like I was just trying to figure it out. And that I had no idea what the book was about for the longest time, for years and years. And then it's just one big, I don't believe in any of these like, oh gee, here's this great organizing document for you. Like some people are big fans of this what's this current software that people really like, that people think it helps you organize your book? Isn't there something?
Oh, Scrivener?
I think that's maybe a...
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's the one I hear about, but it's like,
finally you got to do the work, I hope. I don't think you can punch in, Claude AI and have you say, rework this as literary collage. I don't think that we're quite there yet. But
so just so I'm clear, you have notebooks, like actual physical notebooks, or are you just working on a Word doc and just constantly adding stuff?
I mean, it's a Word document that I just add stuff. And then it's just, and oftentimes it'll be like document 1, document 2, document 3, document 4. At a certain point, when they get too big, they're hard to even navigate, especially if they have some images in them. So like each one is maybe a couple hundred pages, but it's all one ongoing document. And then to me, at a certain point, this is a really crucial part of it, I'm bored with my research methodology. It's like, okay, I could look at one more article about, say, human sexuality, or I could read one more interview with, Esther Perel or whatever, but it's all telling me the same thing. I'm kind of there, like I'm bored with my own research, and I can just tell it, just like I could tell the book began with my original excitement. I can now tell the book is entering a new phase because I'm bored with what I am learning. And so to me, a crucial part is to print it all out. I'm super old school in that way. I just print out, in this case, say Trouble with Men, I printed out, 3,000 pages and just lay on this couch for months and read it over and over again. And I was just looking for, at this point, I still didn't know what the book was about, but I mean, I sort of knew broadly what it's about. The way I always think about it is I'm opening a drawer. Okay, it's about sort of sexuality, but what's the sub drawer that you're opening? Like, okay, yeah, big deal, it's about sex, but what specifically are you saying about sex? And that I didn't have yet. And that anyway, at this point, I'm trying to get rid of stuff. It's 3,000 pages. That book became 134 pages, a very brief book, a lot of white space, maybe only 25,000 words, if that. It was a short book. And so at this point, I'm getting rid of everything that bores me, that repeats, that's a cliche, that's safe. I'm looking only for stuff that makes me nervous, that makes me excited, that I feel feels alive verbally, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, that I just feel like, wow, those 3 sentences, those feel fresh to me. And I'm not overthinking anything. I'm looking for 3,000 pages to go down to 1,000, 500, 400, 300. It is like a film edit. You start a film with an assemblage of footage. You try to get a rough cut, a fine cut, a final cut. I'm becoming apprentice filmmaker in my old age. And so some of the terms of film editing do apply.
Well, I mean, yeah, like shooting a lot of film. That's a That's a documentary film.
Of course.
Adage. In documentary film, as opposed to feature film, where you're working from a script, documentaries are notorious for shooting a ton of footage to try to get to the finished product.
I mean, the cliche is, you typically shoot 100 hours for a 2-hour doc film, and I've become pretty friendly, or an admiring friend of Ross McElwee, the wonderful documentary filmmaker whose film Sherman's March is just a crucial influence on me and my work. And he always says, like, I'm working on this current film, believe it or not, a film adaptation of Reality Hunger, and I've got 80 hours. And I said, like, Ross, how do I work with 80 hours? He goes, 80 hours, that is nothing. Like, he's like, some of his films started with a couple hundred hours. So just to take us through this process, if you want, Brad, is like, okay, at this point, I've got an idea. I've done all the shooting of film, either literally or figuratively.
So you've got like a 3,000 page document,
let's just say. Generally, it's not that long, but maybe at least 1,000 pages. It's a huge waste of time, but it's the only way I know to go into it, because I don't feel like I'm gifted with a great imagination a la, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who just conjures up this world. It's not in me. Or say, T.C. Boyle or somebody who, I don't know, just, Ursula Le Guin or whoever, like real fiction writers. It just doesn't come naturally to me. It's not my shtick. And so instead, have an idea. I shoot a lot of film, figuratively, pour it into a document, hit a roadblock where I feel like I'm bored with the material myself. At this point, I'm very worried because I feel like it's probably DOA. There's probably nothing here. I've wasted the last 4 years of my life. There's nothing here. It's just a bunch of notes. What's the matter with me that I didn't write a good Franzen-esque novel, But I haven't, because I'm not Franzen. I'm me. Like, I do my thing. So at this point, I'm very worried, but I've been through it enough that at this point, I know I can usually find a way into it. But when I first did it, I thought, this is never going to work. So at this point, it's crucial to me. I print it out, and I often this is really exciting for me. I buy a bunch of different colored highlighter pens. Those highlighters that kids use, like yellow and orange and red, like when you are reading a biology textbook and you're underlining the things. I don't know if I have any in this desk, but I'm sure that your audience knows what I mean. And I often will color code different passages. Like, for instance, in Trouble with Men, for instance, somehow we're talking about that book. The 5 chapters are reflections on sex, love, marriage, porn, and power. So those became the 5 mini chapters, or what I called holding tanks, or thematic rubrics. So, like, let's say it related to, say, stuff about childhood. Of course, as we all know, how you were treated in childhood affects your whole personality, but also specifically your sexual drive. So let's say it related to childhood. That might all be, say, yellow. Stuff about porn might be green. Stuff about power might be red. So at this point, I'm getting rid of everything that bores me, but I'm also highlighting.
Can I stop you? Just because I want to make sure people are clear. When you say you're getting rid of, like, you have this, just to keep keep up with this example. You have the 3,000 page document. When you get rid of things that you don't want, are you physically deleting, or are you grabbing the things that you like and putting them in a new document that's going to be like the next draft?
No, I think these are good questions because it's also practical. It's actually sort of a physical, where I have these things printed out as actual documents, and I don't do any of this online. It's really crucial to me to get offline. Like with the 3,000 pages, I had them like 15 notebooks, each one 200 pages. Each one, I think I would almost literally tape bind, at like what used to be called Kinko's. I would literally print them out and bind them as mini books, so that I would have pens, regular pens like this, and I would mark out stuff that bored me. It's almost this very aggressive act of, no, you're boring, you're boring, you're boring, you're boring, you're boring. And then, oh, these paragraphs are good or semi-good. They make me feel galvanized for some reason. To me, a good test is, am I worried about publishing it? That's a good sign. Like if it makes me anxious, nervous, and excited, and I start getting like palpitations, like that's good.
I imagine you've developed this sensitivity over the course of your career. Like you've gotten good at recognizing.
Exactly. And almost always, interestingly, the passages that make me the most anxious, of course, are always the lines that people like the most, because they're like, I can't believe that you said that. I didn't think anyone would ever say that. And now I feel like there's a wonderful line. I've become sort of friendly, kind of a name drop, but your fellow podcaster, Brett Easton Ellis, somehow Brett and I have developed a friendship. He has this wonderful line, he says, which I think I quote in Trouble with Men. He says, if I had $1 for every girl who told me that she masturbated to the sex scenes in American Psycho, of like the criminal scenes, the murder scenes, I'd be a multimillionaire. He probably already is a multimillionaire. But he said, I mean, I think that's an incredible line where these girls said to him, like, he got in trouble for that book in 1999, American Psycho. It was understood to be anti-feminist, but in fact, it's this like super blunt satire of American capitalism. But this
I think it was a little earlier than 99, maybe, right? 91.
90. I think you're right.
Yeah.
But anyway, that book was banned, then it came back. But anyway, that kind of line in which people come up to him and said, I don't know if they still do, but like the in which people said you tunneled down, as it were, into some secret chamber of my heart, and like I found it sexy, even though I'm not supposed to. Like that's, to me, good writing, and that is what I try to do. And that so anyway, the point is kind of a little off topic, but slightly on topic, which is that I try to keep stuff that makes people uncomfortable, but takes them into a deep place of their heart. You could say, well, no, you're just screwed up or whatever, but that's the risk that my work tries to take.
Yeah, and I want to interject here, because I think that you're getting at an important point, and it's like recognizing an emotional reaction in yourself as you're reviewing the text in this like kind of initial compilation document. And I get that. I think that's a good instinct, whether you're writing literary nonfiction collage or you're trying to write your own, novel in a more traditional vein, to pay attention to the text and to note when it's getting at some core truth or making you a little bit emotional or uncomfortable in some way. A question that I would have, and I think you just touched on it a little bit here a minute ago, is like, where's the line? Because there is such a thing as just being sort of kind of needlessly salacious or gross or oversharey in a work.
Yeah.
There's a difference between that and then getting at something that gets to a person's like heart, it hits them at a heart level.
Yeah.
And learning to find the thing that sort of does both, makes you uncomfortable, but also activates your heart in some way. That's the trick, right?
Totally. I mean, it's a great point, and you've explored it in your own work. Your recent memoir, Parts of Board, perhaps something you are working on now. And so, you know, it's a good question. I wish I had the definitive answer, and I think, um, I wish I had the definitive answer. I'm trying to think, how do I recognize it?
I think
And
it's
I think
it's got to be
everybody would.
intuitive, right? At a certain point.
I mean, I guess I go back. I'm trying to think of I'm trying to get an example, and I think it's why I'm so interested in stand-up comedians, both good and bad. I mean, I'm not interested in standard people who are just hey, do you know the difference between LA and New York? Whatever. No, but people who are really, really, really good. And I think of I don't know. I mean, as they say, I know it when I see it. And I think I'm trying to think of a good example. It's a great question because the only thing I'm thinking about here is this thing I quote a lot. It's sort of paraphrasing and I'm mixing with my own stuff, but there was a cool moment, I think in 96, when David Foster Wallace was asked, what's so great about literature? I think it was Laura Miller at Salon who was saying, okay, you got this book out, Infinite Jest. Okay, what's so great about literature? And he kind of gave this beautiful answer where he said that we're existentially alone on the planet. You can't know what I'm thinking and feeling, and I can't know what you're thinking and feeling. And he said, literature at its best is a bridge built across the abyss of human loneliness. I think some of that's his, some of that's mine. I'm not sure exactly what, and I think that's so beautiful. That's it for me. And then he said, oh, with fiction, you can build a bridge. You have to jump across these things in which you have to suspend your disbelief. And I kind of, at that point, I part company with him because I think, in my view, he's a far better essayist than he was a fiction writer. I feel David Wallace building that bridge across the abyss of human loneliness in the essays. The fiction, I don't know, feels to me, I can feel the attempt to lift heavy weights and it feels truly exhausting. And I just don't feel it. And regardless, in my work, the whole point of these revelations isn't oh, gee, David Shields, is a little too passionate a fan of this basketball player. That's not the point. The point is it's a risk that the essayist, as you know, Brad, takes by telling you my secrets. I'm hoping it'll help you to recognize what your secrets are, and not just your secrets, but perhaps a truth of the human heart. And I think I'm trying to think of what is that line? I mean, where do you draw the line, Brad? Or I'm trying to think of a good and bad example. I don't have it right this moment.
Yeah, it's but I mean, it's kind of one of those things where you sort of know it when you see it, or you feel
Totally.
it. You feel it when you read it, or you don't, And it's
I know.
I think maybe the skill of being a good writer, working in this vein, is getting good at panning for gold and knowing when you have it,
Totally.
and when it's fool's gold.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like so many books that get promoted as this, year's hot memoir. I'll take a look at it at the library or something, and I'm like, no. I find Vivian Gornick's distinction a good one. Her whole thing about the situation and the story, where she calls the situation okay, you're in an abusive relationship and, blah, blah, blah. And it all goes back to your childhood, blah, blah, blah. And she kind of says, from all of her teaching, she kind of says, yeah, but who cares? What's the story? By which she means not the narrative, but she means what's the philosophical gold? What's the metaphysical wisdom? And she feels like from all of her work teaching for 20 or more years that's all she had to convey was so many students would write a memoir and it was maybe decently written, but there was no, I guess the Buddhistic discipline of essay writing, and maybe specifically of collage, is that it's all about you, and ultimately it's not about you at all. And I think in the best work, which obviously all of us try to achieve, I feel like I weirdly disappear, even in deeply personal work like Remote, Black Planet, How Literature Saved My Life, Other People Take Some Mistakes. If those books work, they exist, I hope, at a kind of Buddhistic paradox, which is the more they talk about myself, the less they're about me, weirdly, and more about the reader. And again, not everybody would agree. They would say, "Oh no, it's too much information about you." And I'm like, I think not. But if people who like my work, they share with me a sense that the work has a bigger goal. It sort of has metaphysical ramification. And then those people who struggle with my work, whatever, a mixed review or whatever, they go, "Well, why are we hearing about this?" And I'm like, really? Like, can't you see how I'm getting after bigger stuff? But, that's a matter of opinion. Regardless, to take us back to, I'm trying to finish up with so that we've got these documents. I'm taking out a pen and I'm scratching out 90% of it. The stuff I am keeping, I'm highlighting in different colors because it feels like those parts are related to different gestures. Just staying with the trouble with men stuff. Here's stuff about childhood, here's stuff about marriage, here's stuff about porn, here's stuff about power, here's stuff about. And so
you're siloing, you're kind of color coding it. Yep.
That was the word I was trying to find. Yep.
Yep. So thematic silos, or whatever you want to call it, you're kind of grouping by subject matter, color coding the content.
Yeah.
And then is there a point at which you pull all of this color coded content out of this big messy document and put it in? There must be a moment.
So like at this point, I'm totally am lost again. Like I'm like, okay, so what? From 3,000 pages, I've got it down to say 300, where I've pulled all of these things. I pull all these into an actual digital document at this point. I'm still lost. And I think this is a big decision in which it's what I call the difference between vertical and horizontal. Do I, the harder one, I think, it's horizontal. And I think a good example of this are David Markson's beautiful final 4 books. This is not a novel, Reader's Block, the last novel, and Vanishing Point, which I think are just incredible books.
I love those books.
They form this amazing quartet. I mean, they're a huge influence on me, as you can probably tell. And I love his stuff, those 4 books in particular. Those are horizontal in the sense that, let's just take This Is Not a Novel, where it's like, it has these clear thematic patterns, but it goes sort of like this, like let's call A, that life is difficult. B, writers' lives are terrible. C, that we're still reading Sophocles. D, Markson really loves the game of baseball for some reason. E, like he has all these themes, but it just goes like this: B, A, C, D, E, B, A, C, D, E. It just goes, it's very atonal. It's like late jazz, just goes, it just goes. And you have to, he teaches you how to learn to read the patterns. And then the extraordinary thing for me, and say a horizontal work like that, and there's other examples, Amy Fusselman's The Pharmacist's Mate.
What do you mean by horizontal?
Well, let's see if I can find horizontal to me, because I guess maybe a good way to say it is horizontal versus vertical, in the sense that, again, just to name check some of my own work, let's say in Reality Hunger, I actually put the silos together. So for instance,
right,
that's vertical because let's say I have a whole thing on memory. that forms a chapter called memory. Let's say I have a whole thing on reality TV. That forms a chapter called reality TV. Let's say I have a whole thing on hip hop. That forms a whole chapter called hip hop. So the point being, how much do you help the reader horizontally? And you see that in, say, Sarah Mangusto, Maggie Nelson, Amy Fusselman, David Markson. Those people come to mind. Some Leonard Michaels, some Simon Gray, some Spalding Gray. It's just, those are horizontal in the sense that they haven't siloed the thematic gestures into chapters. Does that make sense, Brad?
That does. Yes, that does. That clarifies it.
The other, and for a long time, I tended to think of vertical as being too easy and horizontal as being extremely challenging. But I think that's an unfair distinction, because so many of my favorite books, like say Renata Adler's Speedboat, is definitely vertical. She has 7 dedicated chapters. Within those chapters, there's a lot of collage action, but she helps the reader out a bit by organizing it. So again, let's take Amy Fusselman's The Pharmacist's Maid, beautiful book, which I really love. She has like 3 big patterns in that book, 3 big vectors, and she doesn't break them up into separate silos. That she could have done one on her attempt to get pregnant through, I forget what it's called. Basically, is it called IVF or artificial? I forget what you call it. Where?
Yeah, there's IVF, and then there's IUI, which is more artificial insemination.
So she's trying to get pregnant through clinical means. Again, I'm sort of mangling the terms. And then her father was a pharmacist mate during World War II, and then her father's dying now in the present. And there would be a version of the book in which you do father dying in one chapter, Amy trying to get pregnant in another chapter, and a third chapter would be her father as a pharmacist mate. But instead she goes A, B, C, A, B, C, C, A, B, A. So it just goes back and forth in short paragraphs. That's horizontal. Vertical would be if she had pushed them into separate chapters. In a way, it doesn't matter. This is everything. What comes up next is, how can the whole be greater than the sum of its parts? That's everything. Because, virtually daily, someone will send me a book of collage and say, hey, I heard that you do collage. Here's my book of collage. Don't you think it's cool? I'm like, no, it's just a jumble. It's just a bunch of stuff. The whole point is that, as I like to say, collage is not a refuge for the compositionally disabled. It's an evolution beyond narrative. I think it's much harder to write a work of successful literary collage because the chances of it succeeding are very small. It's very hard to have these pieces come together in a way. To me, when these pieces come together and you start to realize, hey, Amy Fusselman isn't just writing about her father being a pharmacist mate, her trying to get pregnant, or her father dying. No, those are vectors on a larger thematic grid, which is, hey, reader, hey, Amy, hey, everyone. There's a gossamer thin difference between life and death. And this book is going to shove your face into that space. And once you realize that toward the end, it's a kind of OMFG moment. It's like, holy shit. Amy was putting this book together. These pieces of collage, which look random and arbitrary and, quote, lazy, are actually coming to form this beautiful metaphysical whole. And she's making this great argument. I think great collage has a subtle but unmistakable emotional and intellectual argument that just comes together. It's that wonderful Picasso idea of a great painting comes together just barely. And in the best collage, and I have, as you may, I have this long list of my favorite books of collage. And in those books, that happens. You see it in Annie Ernaux's Things Seen, which to me is my favorite book of hers by far. It looks like just a jumble of impressions of the Paris subway, the Paris metro. But if you read it the way she wants you, you realize, holy Moses, this book is actually about something. And she never tells you, but boy, do you feel it in that final paragraph.
Is there a place where listeners can find your list of favorite works of collage? Is it on your website or anything?
I can send it to you. I think when I published Reality Hunger, I think some places published the list. But if you want, I wonder is there a way I could share it with you, Brad, and you could
get
or
it? People can Google it, or if you have it somewhere, I'd love to see it, just because I think
I can send it to you. Like, I think somehow I think of Powell's Bookstore in Portland might have listed it. After you and I finish up here, I can try and find it. You can Google it, or I can, or at the very least, Brett, I can send you a list of which is very partial. I haven't updated it as well as I should, but it's a good starting point.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think like the real core of the issue when it comes to making books in this manner is that sort of the easy part is the gathering phase, where you're just maximally going out and collecting. And then I think it's also somewhat easy to go through with the pen, and you have this hard copy of the document and just crossing stuff out. I can imagine that process must be kind of fun, where you get to gauge what actually moves you or gives you an emotional or fearful response. I agree with you
so far, for sure. And then is your point, what's the hard part for you?
I was just going to say, the color coding, I can also see being somewhat easy.
Yeah.
The artistry when it comes to collage, and I speak from some experience here. I'm actually working on a book, and
Board is on my list, I think, Brad. I honestly love that book.
Well, I credit also to my co-author Justin Benton, who worked with me on that. And but I'm working on a book right now, a memoir in this vein about 2020, and it is the most painstaking work. The actual collaging, the actual choice making, when it comes to sequence, when it comes to trying to find rhythm and continuity and propulsion to keep the reader reading and oriented, as you want them to be, at least like thematically. I know this stuff can move really quickly, and that's part of its charm. But like you say, if you just slap it all together, it's not going to succeed.
No. I mean, propulsion is everything. And I think sometimes people will say, hey, David, I read your book, say, I don't know, whatever. Nobody Hates Trump, or How We Got Here, or Trouble with Men. And I'll go, I could not stop reading, and I don't know why. It was just a bunch of paragraphs, and I'm like, do you have any idea how much work I put in to making you follow along? It looks casual. It looks random. But, again, it looks like you could, and I think the great thing about this part of the process for me is, I don't know, somehow the metaphor I sometimes use is sort of like, I don't know, I haven't taken that many ships through ice encrusted water. Or let's say you're going, this image I have is like you're going through the water, and it's very foggy, and there's all these ice flows, and you're in this small boat, and you keep on thinking like, behind all this fog and clouds and ice flows, I think I see a huge ship emerging from the clouds. And you go, no, I think it's an illusion, which is basically saying, I don't think Amy's book's about anything, but it's just interesting to read. But I'm getting a glimmer of some ship out there. You keep on going in your little rowboat as a reader, like, I'm still seeing that glimmer of this boat through the fog and the ice flows and the rain. Like, again, this is you reading Amy's book. Like, I can't get that ship out of my mind. And then you kind of get toward the very end of the book, and it's like, hold the phone. That ship is as big as the QE2. It's like, and it's just blaring at you like, holy Moses, it's this huge ship staring us in the face. And it's this big theme. And again, the challenge of it, and I think again in bad collage, the writer spells it out too. Like you can err in a couple of ways. One, it's not there at all, which is 99% of collage. It's just a bunch of people throwing stuff at the wall. Like, no. Then the second thing would be like, I don't trust the reader. I'm going to spell it out in this rather didactic way. And I could name books that, in my view, do that, which in my view are wildly overpraised. Then the beautiful books, again, it's a great painting that comes together just barely. The extra excitement of it is I, as a writer, never figure that out until very late in the process. So if that ship emerges from the clouds toward the very end of the process, the reader can feel the reader's going on this journey with you, and that you haven't figured it out a priori. Like, hey, I know what Trouble with Men is about. It's all about how, terrible. No, like I didn't know. And so I'm figuring it out as I go. And then I reconstitute the collage pieces to mimic my my process. It's a, I don't, I mean, like I say, I don't see how anything is more interesting. Like,
well, I think another thing I would add is that often collage that succeeds for me, like you're talking about, it's sort of accrues power as you read it in ways that are hard to define. You just get this kind of feeling, and it's like building. I can think of like reading Reality Hunger for the first time, and I think that's a book that makes a really compelling and like incredibly creatively stimulating argument that builds power as it goes, and that left me as a reader. I think it leaves most people who read it, especially creative people, with a real sense of excitement. And that's the power of that book, is that you put it down and you want to make something.
And then that book was a total. I mean, that was a course pack, as you may know, for years. For years, I was just teaching the material as a course pack. And then over time, I tried to edit it down. I brought it into vertical silos. I got rid of stuff that was boring. I rewrote all the passages from other people. I added all of my own stuff. I didn't think that book was anything that my agent at the time thought it would just be published by some like third-rate academic press. Knopf published it as a kind of loss leader. Not that a book like, but it caught something people were trying to articulate, and it was a cool, I think that book still has some purchase, on the culture, like, and in a way, it leads very clearly to a book like How We Got Here, because, it has the same method. In a way, I'm asking the same question, which is, what do we do with our reality hunger in the face of, authoritarian fiction making? But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Brad. You were on a good roll with something else.
Well, I just wanted to say, like there's different ways that literary collage succeeds, in my view. And one of the ways is that, like you say, it makes a really compelling intellectual and emotional argument that builds power as it goes, and might like spur the reader to action or to some sort of creative excitement or intellectual excitement. There's another thing that I've noticed in my read of really good literary collage, and here I will point to like David Markson, since you brought him up. But it's also, applies to your work, applies to a lot of people, especially those who have created like a body of work in this vein. But with Markson's work as the example, what I find so powerful about it is how emotional it is. Despite being really pared down, there is this incredible, like, I find it so moving and elegiac. And I feel him in the work. Like he's like this ghost in the machine. Yeah. And I can almost picture him in his little apartment in Manhattan at the end of his life. And that's like, it's because he doesn't, I mean, occasionally he'll drop a line in there where he's like, I'm in my apartment, I've got my note cards, or I'm trying to remember. It's been a minute since I read those books, but like, that is what it left me with, was this kind of like strange emotional feeling and a deep affection for him. as like a lover of books and a man sort of staring down the end of life and the meaning of life and art, like kind of fatalistically, but with like great beauty and courage.
That's so beautiful. And, like before he died, I sent him a bunch of fan letters, and I got to know him slightly. And I visited his apartment before he died, and I'm like, hey, I've already been here. I didn't see anything new. And I love that guy, and I love his work. And interestingly, I don't like, a lot of people like, say Wallace, like Wittgenstein's Mistress, which I find unreadably bad.
Me too.
And like, that's not a good book. And I think, to me, there's an interesting space. Why is Wittgenstein's Mistress so boring and so bad? And then suddenly something happens to make, I think the next one, I believe, is This Is Not a Novel, or it's Reader's Block. I always get confused which one's next. And to me, he gets rid of the novelistic apparatus. That's crucial. Wittgenstein's Mistress has this, to me, rather pretentious donné, which is that the world's over and she's walking around quoting philosophy poorly. And no, it's sort of like Marx and still trying to be a conventional novelist. And I guess it's the anti-novelist in me. Like, this is just a bad experimental novel, like new wave novel from Robbe-Grillet in like 1952 or something. Like, no. And then he finds his own thing. And I do think maybe his terminal illness created a more urgency. I don't know. Why is Wittgenstein so dead for us and the next four are so alive? I mean, that's a very interesting question.
Well, the next four make a significant shift away from whatever he was up to in Wittgenstein's Mistress. And it's a lot. I mean, there's all sorts of subtlety and subterranean action happening in those last four books. So it's not like they're simpler in a one for one way, but they are clearer and they're quicker to the vein. Those books for me, the last four, like I read them and it's like they go down easy, but they're incredibly stimulating. And as you say, they build power as they move towards their conclusions.
Your point about, like, I just hate how people, I mean, I do think collage is maybe the best medium for people who are drawn toward abstract expressionism and for whom ideas are alive. Having said that, I resist terribly the idea that somehow collage is not emotional, that somehow only narrative can carry feeling. If anything, I feel the opposite. The moment we're inside a narrative handcuffs, I'm really bored. I feel manipulated. I feel condescended to. I feel patronized. I feel like I'm in a commercial enterprise, and I feel like all you want me to do is turn pages. But I mean, I totally agree with you. When I think of my favorite books of collage, I am on emotion. I mean, I am moved to tears, whether it's Annie Ernaux, Fusselman, all the people that we have mentioned. Marx's books are like, I move virtually to the point of tears. And maybe, I mean, it's a great point, and it's a good rejoinder to people who find collage rather, I don't know what, kind of Mandarin or something. Like, I don't. I would say almost nothing else moves me. I mean, if it doesn't have white space in it, it's almost dead to me, which is weird, because for a lot of people, they want a linear narrative. No, I mean, which I guess, I forget if we've talked about this, if in my case, it has something to do with my childhood stutter and the kind of, you could see collage as a bit of a sort of a disfluent text, or my allergy to fluid narrative. I don't know. I would tend not to want to lean on it too heavily, but there is something, and I've done some interviews with it, with people like Julia Sukis, who's in the How We Got Here film, and she's a collagist, and we talked decently, I thought, about the relationship between, I don't know, her growing up with two languages, I think like maybe Ukrainian and English, I forget exactly what. And then I really had trouble talking as a kid. And I developed, I think, huge metacognitive self-consciousness about language being used unself-consciously. It was like I was a little 5-year-old deconstructionist. It's like I got Derrida before like I got how everything is language when I was like very young. And so there's a way in which somehow collage and my ancient struggles with articulation, I think collage is very lyrical, but there's a way in which I'm not comfortable with unself-conscious discourse. I think that's maybe part of it. I don't. Does that make any sense? It's not like every collagist had a childhood speech impediment. That's ridiculous. But what am I trying to get to there, Brad? Do you think, or
Well,
is
I
it
think
kind of a bullshit connection?
no, I don't think so. I think that there's something to it, and it makes an easy, like logical sense to me. I don't know if that's the whole thing, but it's
Right.
part of it.
Right.
And I think that what you're getting at is that collage serves maybe the way that you think and process the world better than any other form. And
100%.
when you're working in that vein too, you're working with all of these disparate pieces. You're working with all of these disparate and often competing pieces, thoughts, outtakes, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And I think that it serves to build a kind of inherent intellectual mistrust, like in your own mind, and I think that's healthy. I could be wrong. This thing,
I
like
see what you mean.
these two things are opposing and true. It seem true at the same time. And
That's
what I love
beautiful.
about it. That's what I
It
love
also
about it as a reader.
it also tends to encourage and to reward a private and public discourse. Like you can get very private, very internal, but it can also gesture hugely toward the world. And that is part of that. That's really beautiful. Yeah.
Well, and I think we'll end, I think like for people who are wanting to work in this way or working in this way, I just think that maybe the most salient thing that we've talked about when it comes to works of collage that succeed is that the emotional content of the book has to be there. And it has to be there no matter what you're writing, doesn't it? I mean, if you're writing an essay, if you're writing a novel in a more traditional vein, if you're writing literary collage, you have to, like I like to say, change the temperature of the reader.
I love
if you
that.
want them to enjoy it and to come away with it feeling like they've been edified by it or that they spent their time well.
I know, like there's this beautiful thing, and I know that we've been talking for almost 2 hours, Brad. It seems like it's about 15 minutes, but I know we should wrap it up. But like this person once asked Ross McElwee, like, when are you going to make real films? And he goes, real films? These are my real films. Nothing is more real than these films. And it's like, I'm not fucking around. Like these books, they might seem like they're kind of experimental or postmodernism, or I don't know, a professor's experimental text. Like that's absolute bullshit. I mean, at least for me, nothing could be more. I do love how in collage, the best works, they're overtly about what they're about. Like I think what happens for me in a lot of novels, the writer starts with a good idea, like I'll write a novel about marriage. And then they just junk it up with all this plot about car wrecks and financial skullduggery. And like, wait, what happened to your investigation of the marriage? Whereas I think in collage, what I so love about it, to use to the Hollywood cliche, is cut to the chase, which is an old Hollywood term for cut to the car chase. Give us the plot. And I think collage in a good way is get to the fucking point. Like, what is it really about? And in the best collage, again, I can send you the list or we can find it online. It's like, it actually is a book for an adult in which we're going to actually wrestle with the existential question of being alive now. I mean, that wonderful Samuel Johnson thing of, a book either allows us to escape existence or teaches us how to endure existence. And I think what I love about the best collage is they overtly teach us how to endure existence, not as self-help, but as philosophical journey. And like, that just kills for me. Like I just love it.
Well, I think we will end there. That seems like as good a place as any. I could keep talking to you.
It's so great to talk with you, Brad. I feel, sometimes I question about Collage because I look at my bank statement sometimes, but it's like, fuck, I love this stuff so much.
Well, that's it. I mean, honestly, that's really it in the end. And by the way, if you tried to shoehorn yourself into some other genre, you would be miserable. And
that's what happened. I was trying to write my fourth novel my fourth book as a novel, and I just could not shoehorn it. And it's sort of the moment I'm most proud of in my writing life is I followed my instinct, and from the embers of my fourth novel, I created my first book of collage, this book called Remote from, my goodness, 30 years ago.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, David.
Likewise,
Congrats on
Brett.
all of your success and all of the books that you've published over your career. Congrats in particular on these latest 2 books and the film adaptation.
Thank you so much, Brett. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Obviously, we just had a ball. It was super fun.